call the meeting back into session. We have been waiting on our records and minutes from the prior meeting. They're not necessary to proceed. Council's advised me, since no changes were made to either resolution that was presented to the executive committee today regarding the two items we're going to consider this evening in full board, then the resolutions that were submitted in the full board packet are unamended, and we'll just go with those. So, Scott, can I have a hard copy? Okay, let me start by asking everyone to please rise for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk. Roll call.
Board Member Daly. Present.
Thank you. Both Ms. Relaford, Ms. Pastuccia, and Ms. Blair are away for work reasons, and they are sorry not to be here. There are no citizen remarks that have been submitted. Just in case, I'm going to call that question again. Is there any citizen that didn't know the process and wants to speak to your elected board of county board members? How about you officers? Y'all good? Okay, thank you. All right, Madam Clerk.
Item 2, zoning ordinance and resolutions. A recommendation from your executive committee to approve an ordinance amending Chapter 22 of the Peoria County Code to establish a county cannabis retailer's occupation tax.
Okay, motion to approve, please, from Ms. Williams, and a second from Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry, Robinson. Well, I put two words together there, B.J. Johnson. All right, Mr. Robinson. Johnson. Discussion. Just for the record, let me get Mr. Sorrell to give us, with brevity, what we're doing here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be a little bit briefer than I was in the executive committee. The General Assembly adopted and the governor signed into law two public acts earlier this year. The first is the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. The second is the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act. The first one is legalized the use of recreational cannabis, its taxation, and created social justice programs related to the legalization. It also granted specific taxation rights to municipalities and counties in the form of a retailer's occupation tax. The second act made the pilot program for medical cannabis permanent and then further amended the county's portion of the retailer's occupation tax. The tax that is before you, as recommended by the committee, is as follows. There are two separate taxes, and they would be covered under an amendment to Chapter 22 of the Peoria County Code. That chapter is the section of our Code of Ordinances that establishes and imposes any tax that you have the authority to do so without a voter-approved referendum. The Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act says that that you may impose the cannabis retailer's occupation tax simply by a majority vote of the members present here. So there are two types of taxes that are listed in the ordinance, to the amendment to the ordinance. They are as follows. The first one is only applicable to the unincorporated portions of the county. And that is in quarter percent increments, a maximum of 3.75%. Staff recommended and the committee forwarded on to you that level, 3.75%. That would be on top of any state sales taxes that are already existing or that have come into play as a result of the act itself. The second tax is in relationship to any or all gross sales that would occur within any one of our 13 municipalities. And that, again, is in quarter percent increments and statutorily can be no higher than 3%. The committee forwarded onto you the ordinance that has that maximum of 3%. What that means is in a municipality, and let's use the city of Peoria as an example since they voted last night to adopt their own sales tax, recreational cannabis sales within the city of Peoria would first have the state taxes applied to it. It would then have the city of Peoria's cannabis sales tax applied to it, which is 3%. And then if this ordinance passes tonight, then our 3% would be applied in addition to those other taxes, those other state and local taxes. Those are the taxes that would be applicable. I'll just stop there, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sorrell. Appreciate your work on this and the staff. Okay, we would be at discussion. Starting on my left, which would be your right, Ms. Daly. Any questions, discussion? Mr. Robinson.
Who is Mr. Johnson? I wanted to say a couple of things here. One is that when I first got elected to this board, I always said that when a big decision would come up, I would go into prayer first because I am a religious man. I'm a pastor. So I just wanted to let you know this was a heavy duty one because I've been around a while now and I've seen the bad effects of marijuana and I realize that we need the tax revenue and I wish there was another way to do it, but I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Others? I'm not going to dawdle here, you guys. Okay, then seeing no other comments and saving you the windiness of myself, I will call Mr. Dillon.
Maybe it would just be appropriate for you to mention, because they're on the camera first. So if anybody's watching this at home, we just got out of a 2-hour committee meeting discussing this. So if you think that there's no questions or no comments being made and this isn't being taken seriously or there was thought put into this, I think sometimes we forget, if you were watching this at home on Facebook Live or anything, that just because no one has comments around this horseshoe doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of thought and talk been put in it, because we just got out of a meeting that started at 3 and got over about 15 minutes ago. So there was quite a bit of discussion in committee.
Thank you, Jimmy. Well made. And the minutes of that meeting will be available shortly. Please vote.
Let's see, we got one person missing. 13 ayes, 1 nay.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk.
Item 2, a recommendation from your executive committee to approve an ordinance amending Chapter 6 of the Peoria County Code to establish Article 5, adult use of business establishments for cannabis permitted.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Motion to approve, Mr. Dillon, and a second by Mr. Renaud. This does require some explanation, so I think I'll call on our administrator to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Public Act 101-27, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, that was adopted by the General Assembly and signed into law by the governor earlier this year, created provisions under the legalization of recreational cannabis that would allow local governments such as the county to either prohibit or permit, such as the ordinance before the board does, the sale of recreational cannabis within the unincorporated portions of the county, the areas where our jurisdiction lies. If you choose to permit the sale, we will do that through an amendment to Chapter 6 of the Peoria County Code. That's the chapter in our Code of Ordinances that establishes regulations for a variety of different types of businesses. The ordinance before you creates a new article under that chapter, Article 5, in which we would create the initial set of business regulations as it relates to recreational cannabis. And so taking the definition of what an adult use cannabis craft grower is, an adult use cannabis cultivation center, an adult use cannabis dispensing organization, an adult use cannabis infuser organization or infuser, an adult use cannabis processing organization or processor, and an adult use cannabis transporting organization or transporter, taking the definition straight from statute of in the act of those 6 items and incorporating them into this new article. We define what each one of those are, and then the ordinance as presented and recommended by the committee would permit the sale and the location, operation, ownership of such establishments within the county, specifically the unincorporated areas. Additionally, the amendment to Chapter 6 also stipulates that those 6 uses may be further regulated by Chapter 20 of the Peoria County Code. That's our Unified Development Ordinance. That's where our zoning regulations lie. Amendments to the zoning code, or the portions of the zoning code in Chapter 20, would be scheduled to come to you at your regular meeting in December of this year, and that's based on the premise that the ordinance is adopted as presented by the Executive Committee. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Searle. Appreciate that. Let me begin by just reflecting on what just happened a few moments ago, particularly for those who may be listening at home or wherever you stream. I've never seen a tax pass this body so fast in my life without the debate that's usually accustomed to any tax in this room. So congratulations. Now, having said that, let's talk about why we're here. Starting on my left, I'm going to go around the room twice. I would say that part of the conversation this evening that includes the dialogue about the morality of this or whether it should be legal or not, I just, a colleague of mine in the room suggested I just say, look, that horse is out of the barn. We are where we are. The item in front of us has to do with the business licensing and how in the county of Peoria, in those unincorporated areas to what we would have authority to license business enterprises, which I think we'll probably get a map here in a minute to show all y'all how limited that is. But I will start. Should I recognize you at this point? Would you like to be recognized first, Mr. Elsasser, since I know you have an item of business?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce a substitute motion, which is in hard copy, and then it's also on your iPad, which basically prohibits the sale of cannabis in the unincorporated part of Peoria County.
So that substitute, thank you, Mr. Elsasser. So that substitute resolution, is it on white paper?
Yeah.
Mr. Searle, the difference between this is when we get to section, page 3, section 6-152.
Right.
Is that where this goes different on us, where it just prohibits all classes of licenses
Correct.
that are described in the ordinance that is on the agenda, the resolution that's on the agenda?
Generally, Mr. Chairman, yes, although, do you need a second?
I know. I just wanted to get that clarification in.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second on this? Thank you, Mr. Rosenbaum.
So if I could clarify, generally, yes, Mr. Chairman. So this substitute ordinance submitted by Mr. Elsasser does have some additional whereas clauses. The now therefore be it ordained clause at the bottom of page 1 that bleeds on the top of page 2 does say prohibited instead of permitted. In the middle of page 3, section 6-152, cannabis business establishments prohibited instead of permitted. Then list those 6 uses that I referenced earlier in my comments, stating that they are prohibited. And then 6-153, public nuisance declared. That is a new section that states operation of any prohibited cannabis business establishment within the county in violation of the provisions of this article is hereby declared a public nuisance and shall be abated pursuant to all available remedies. I would say, Mr. Chairman, those are the material differences between the version Mr. Elsasser is proposing and the version that the executive committee forwarded on to you.
So I would also add the whereas sections on page 1 under ordinance. There are several of them citing resources Mr. Elsasser wants us to consider tonight that are not the same whereases in the original ordinance. So you're going to add something? Page 36-154 violations, that is also a significant change. It's been inserted that is not in the original resolution that's before us tonight. So we've muddied that up a little bit, try to point folks to the right place for you, Mr. Elsasser. So you're the first, Mr. Rosenbaum's the second. I'll let you have the floor.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me. I know that there have been times on the county board over the past several years where, people will bring up a motion, unexpectedly or without notifying anyone, and everyone's shocked, and even many years ago where the chairman wouldn't even recognize the people because they were upset about it. So I called the chairman last night and told him I would like to do this, and this is where we're at today. This basically prohibits the sale of cannabis in the unincorporated part of Peoria County, and I represent a big area out there. I know Paul does, and Matt Windish and Jimmy and Sharon do as well, and the people that I've talked to, they don't want it sold out in that area. Now, I mean, I know it's going to be sold in Peoria and the potential in West Peoria, Peoria Heights, and all the other municipalities, Bartonville, Chillicothe, but we don't want it sold out there, and because we want to take into consideration the effects that something like this is going to cause on our community. Now, at the public safety meeting, there was some questions about, has anyone done any research on the other states where this has been legalized, and because they've had a few years under their belts, and if anyone else has any other research other than what I found, I'd be glad to see it. I mean, I'd like to see it, and this is the only one that I could find is from the Centennial Institute, and they talked about how potentially detrimental it can be to those young people under the age of 25 and their cognitive skills, and then also the fact that I think this is more of a specific item that they've come up with, or specific number, and they said that for every dollar gained in tax revenue, there's $4.50 spent just to mitigate the effects of legalization, and so it's really hard for me to accept the fact that our state, over the last several years has completely blown our budget. They're almost bankrupt. people are leaving our state, and now they're trying to partially balance the budget on the behalf on the backs of people who are going to be using cannabis now legally. And I think it's, if you read what has happened in Colorado, there's really no net gain because there's so many problems. And I know if Mr. Bob Payeto was here tonight, he would sit here and say, well, he'd put his hand down on the on the desk and he'd say, well, it makes people lazy. It affects their minds, and it hurts our society. And here's a man that was a principal for 30 or 35 years, and so please consider this because it's about our young people. I cannot support anything which in number 2 where it says cannabis is a chemical known to have potential harmful effects to the human body and altering of the mind. There's no way, as much as I love all the young people in our county, no matter whether they're out in my area or in the city or wherever they're at, that I can support, legally selling this product anywhere in the county. And so I'd sure appreciate your consideration for that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Alcester. I'll be sure to come back to you on the close. Anyone else? Mr. Ricker, then Mr. Dillon.
I think Mr. Alsasser stated it fairly accurately, and I'll just be short as I don't think it's the position of the county to advocate businesses to sell this product for the many reasons he cited. So for that reason, I will support his amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dillon.
As much as I respect my colleague's opinion, I think it's a little misleading to say that it's making it appear like the county will become the wild, wild west of marijuana sales here. Scott gave a very nice presentation in our last meeting we're talking about 195 properties that are properly zoned in the county. They're C2, which is general commercial, or I1 or I2. So I'd actually ask Scott to give the same presentation he gave there. But out of that, even though there's 195 that are zoned currently for this, they all have to have a special use. So each one would have to come on a case-by-case basis and have to be approved. So it would give neighbors input, communities input to come if they want it or not want it, and the county would go from there. So just by approving a proper zoning, we're doing nothing different than what we've done with bars, taverns, and everything else. The sheriff actually did a great job of talking about it in the last meeting, that this is an issue for them. They're going to have to deal with it regardless of the matter. So let's properly tax it and properly regulate it, not to put words in his mouth, but this isn't just you're going to see things pop up all over. And remember, Allison even brought it up. There's 75 total permits that will get distributed through the state. I think, what'd you say, Scott? 3 of them would come to this district of 5 counties. So we're not going to see a proliferation of all these stores on every corner. But our zoning is set up for a reason, and I think it's proper that we actually understand our zoning and the properties that this would require. And Scott did that by creating maps, and it shows the pockets that are in Mr. Fennell's district, my district, your district, and majority of them are in Medina or Jim's area, my area, Paul's area, and Sharon's area, right in little clusters. So it puts things in perspective when you can look at it on a map and actually see where the locations that we're talking about. Even though Peoria County is a very large area, this doesn't just mean a shop can just appear anywhere in the county without going through proper zoning. And one thing that this county does have a track record of is we don't very often permit spot zoning. So it's not like a place in the outside of Princeville, like when we dealt with the hog farm, can just go and come and zone it and nobody has any say in it. This is pretty clear cut and dry on how you would have to do zoning, spot zoning, and have to do special use, which this county has a pretty good track record going back to when Carol was the chairperson and here the last few years of actually looking at zoning. So I just want to put that in perspective, that this won't become the wild, wild west of them popping up on every corner outside of the county. So Scott has the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Scott?
Thank you. Members, you should have this at your desk already. Members of the audience here in the room, if you want your own paper copy, there's some extras on the table on my left over here if you'd like one. We'll obviously put it up online as well. With the first page of the handout shows the entire county. It shows how the portions of the county, the unincorporated areas, are currently zoned, and the village of Norwood, which we still do zoning for because the village has not adopted their own zoning code. The parcels that we highlight are colored in either bright red, light purple, or dark purple. Those are C2 general commercial, I1 light industrial, and I2 heavy industrial in order. The ordinance does have a C3 regional commercial designation, but we currently do not have any property zoned C3 in our county. As Mr. Dillon alluded to, countywide, there are 195,000 parcels that are zoned either C2, I1, or I2. Of that 195, 105 are zoned C2 general commercial, 54 are light industrial, and 36 are heavy industrial. I'm going to continue talking from the first page, but if you want to scroll through the rest of the handout, since the county itself is a large geographic area, we just broke it down for you in terms of what the each township looks like. We tried to fit 2 townships on a page. The first page would obviously be Millbrook and Akron townships in the northwest corner of the county, and we just worked our way across. You can see, just as an example, using Akron Township, we've got some areas that are purple in color here or maybe here. Those are industrial uses currently underway. There's a small speck of red up here just outside the corporate limits of Princeville. That actually is an active business that is zoned commercial. And so as you look through the rest of the detail at the township level, you can see where those 195 parcels are actually located. Staff didn't have enough time to actually inventory all 195 of those to see if there's an active business on those parcels or not. But anecdotally, we know that the overwhelming majority, yes, there are. If the committee pleases, or if the board pleases, we can come back with a report back to this body or to a representative committee at a later time to give you that exact detail. Additionally, overwhelming majority are actively being used for either a commercial or industrial purpose. That leaves very few of them actually available as vacant property ready for development. Lastly, I would say from a zoning perspective, as Mr. Dillon alluded to, we within the city of Peoria, there is one medical dispensary under the Act. That medical dispensary will be granted a recreational dispensing license that they can then operate in 2 locations. And then within our 5-county region, which is ourselves, Marshall County, Stark County, Tazewell, and Woodford counties, there will be 3 recreational dispensing licenses issued by the state of Illinois. There are 75 of those statewide, only 3 in our 5-county region, so there is no guarantee that we'll see any one of those 3 in Peoria County, whether it be the unincorporated areas or within one of our municipalities. Happy to answer any other questions from the board.
Thank you. Mr. Ricker?
So I guess my brief takeaway from this is that Mr. Dillon's helped us confirm there's right now 195 parcels that are zoned properly that could house a distribution or a facility. So there's plenty of places available in the county today that are properly zoned that could be a location for 1, 2, or 3 or whatever. That's all I get from this, is that there are plenty of places that are available. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenbaum?
And of those properties, there's probably 200 acres within a mile of my residence That's all farm ground that's zoned.
I'm sorry, say it again.
There's about 200 acres about a mile north of my residence that's zoned industrial. That's ag ground. So it's right down the road from the jail. So to go along with Mr. Rickert, there is quite a bit of vacant ground that is available. And then I have a bunch down in Mapleton that's available, and even in Bartonville area. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Ms. Groves, Allison?
I do think we have to be cautious of voting to accept the benefits of such tax, but then saying we don't want it anywhere in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Renaud?
The way the amended ordinance is written, with most of the whereases on here, to me, those are all arguments that it should have been had in Springfield as to whether or not it should be legal to use it. That debate's already happened, and it is legal in Illinois to use cannabis and cannabis products. We can't change that. The only thing we can do is tell people where they're going to go to buy it. So I'm not in favor, or will not be supporting the amended ordinance.
Thank you. We'll take plenty of time. Mr. Rosenbaum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask permission to tell a personal story that may take me a few minutes?
As long as it's germane to the resolution on the floor, which
Well, it has the effects of marijuana, what it can do to the family, and that's why I'm asking permission ahead of time.
Any objections? Proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you a story about a young man named Michael. He got married to a young lady that had 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. They hadn't been married very long, and his wife decided to go out with some friends out to a rural area to go mudding. Well, she took a little boy with her, and on the way to a meeting with her friends, she met 2 other young men, but they had been out fishing all night, drinking beer and smoking marijuana. They swerved over, hit her head on, killed her, killed the little boy. Now, I know Springfield they passed it. Springfield doesn't always get everything right, okay? I totally disagree with it, but okay, let's figure out all the people that now have been affected. We've got Michael, lost his wife and stepson. The little boy's father lost his son. The 2 sisters lost their mother and their brother. Okay, we got the 2 18-year-olds that were in the car, the one that was driver. Their lives are affected the rest of their life. They know that they've killed 2 people. Then there's the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, all of them involved. I told you this is a personal story. Michael's my son. So just to let you know, I want you all to be able, we hear stories all the time, but until they hit home, close to, somebody whatever, all we're saying is we don't want to sell it in the county. We know that the city's going to sell it. We know the other ones are going to do it. But let's do our part to stop it. The sheriff has to do his part. That's why I voted for the tax. If it's going to be in there, let's tax it so at least the money goes to help offset all of his cost. But I don't talk that much during the meetings. I talk a lot afterwards. But I'm imploring you to all think twice about what Brian brought up. Maybe we ought to stand up for what's right, not for what Springfield decided. I'm sorry. As far as I'm concerned, they don't know what they're doing down there. Or Chicago, I guess I should put it bluntly. I'm not going to be politically correct tonight. I don't care about being politically correct. I care about doing what's right. Now, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's stop some of it anyway. Let's stand up and do what's right. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thoughtful remarks. Anyone else? Okay, so let's remember what we're doing here. The Mr. Elsasser. Sure.
With regard to Springfield and Mr. Renault's remarks, I don't think they would have listened to me if I'd have brought these things up anyway, but there are, that reminds me of Eldon Pohemus when he was on the board, his phone was ringing. But there are, I believe, 4 other communities, 2 of them very close by, El Paso and Morton, and then in the suburbs, I believe it's Bloomingdale and Naperville, who have voted to ban the sale of cannabis. So I think Peoria County is a conservative county, and that's what I stand for, and I'd appreciate your support for this tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Elsasser. So we have on the floor a substitute resolution, the one submitted by Mr. Elsasser. We'd be voting on that next. Vote of nay. All right, so a vote of yes on the substitute resolution puts Mr. Elsasser's resolution first. A vote of no has us go back to the original resolution that came out of exec for us. So, Mr. Dillon.
I just want to make sure that I'm sure that everybody's clear. This doesn't necessarily say that we approve or disapprove. This properly zones and puts restrictions on properties that they would still have to come to the Peoria County and apply for a special use. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody, that this isn't just putting proper zoning, just like we've done to taverns, all different types of different codes inside our zoning. This does not necessarily say, yes, I approve of opening a shop on every corner. This says we're going to have proper zoning in Peoria County, and these are the properties that are identified, just to make that clear.
Again, a vote on the substitute resolution of yes is that you're supporting Elsasser's substitute. A vote of no is to go back to the one that is regularly scheduled to be decided tonight. Am I missing someone? Okay, Ms. Daly.
I just wanted to say that I certainly talked to Member Elsasser about this proposal. I've thought about it a lot. And I believe that because recreational marijuana will be legal as of January 1st, that it should be treated like alcohol, which is a legal substance to consume. And I can certainly say that, no, we didn't decide on the legalization of this, and the person that I work for did not support it. But I don't believe that's what's before us today. I think it needs to be treated exactly the same way as we treat alcohol.
Thank you, and I appreciate that comparative because it's helps me too when I'm talking to folks. All right, so I've tried to call this question a couple times. Now, is it sure on the substitute? Yes, if we're for Mr. Elsasser. No, if we want to go back to the original one. Please vote.
Three ayes and 11 nays.
So the substitute resolution fails. We'd be back at the original motion. Now it's time to bring your song. Anybody else? Comments on the original resolution to amend our code for the licensing of those models as defined in the state statute. Scott, would you repeat those again for me? Cannabis craft grower, cannabis cultivation center, cannabis dispensing organization, cannabis infuser organization or infuser, cannabis processing organization or processor, cannabis transporting organization or transporter. I think I had the chance to share with a couple of you my reviews on this subject of late, and it's hard to sit up here. It's hard to sit and talk to colleagues about something when they vehemently or really feel strongly for or against something. I'm a baby boomer, so I know what I was taught as a little kid, and if you take the pulse of millennials, Xers and Ys and iGens, it's really remarkable. Baby boomers on Pew Institute's research are now like 54% in favor of legalizing something that we're all taught was like really, really bad. But there's something much, much larger than that question, and I think the effort that was led by one of our local representatives, Representative Jahan Gordon, wasn't aimed at the legalization of something as much as it was the decriminalization of something that had a disproportionate effect on residents of Illinois, and the ongoing trail of challenges that people who are arrested and convicted for marijuana at some felony level, the record on people and their inability to get jobs or driver's licenses or gain employment, the social injustice that's occurred from, particularly since the Clinton era and 3 strikes and this massive attack on narcotics and trafficking. And I told you in executive committee of the percentage of drug arrests that are related to marijuana that the FBI was reporting nationally, and then of that subset, how many were related to simple possession, which I think is what's really been decriminalized here. When you go down beneath those statistics, you're 3.3 to 3.5 times more likely to have been arrested and convicted of a simple offense of possession of marijuana if you were a person of color. And so the national attack on marijuana and other narcotics in many ways has been a failed attempt to stop something that's still going on, and in its wake has created an unintended consequence on an awful lot of people, many of them people of color. And I think that's something that you have to really stop and take time and read. If this was simply about raising money or taxes for the state, I'm not sure we'd be here today. I don't know that the state would have done that. This was largely about the social inequity that our justice system is affording people of one color or socioeconomic status versus another. And I'm very proud to say that as a Caucasian that's wrong, and we have a chance to correct this, because this goes one step further, and that has to do with the expungement of records and the mandatory expungement of records related to arrest or conviction for offenses of marijuana possession. So that's my last thought on it. I'm not going to preach anymore. I appreciate everyone searching their heart on this one. I know a lot of you are here tonight to make a decision that you feel is very close, and I'm proud of you for that. Please vote yes to approve. Mr. Salzer, I thought I was getting the closing words, man.
I appreciated the remarks of you in regard to delving into this other aspect of this marijuana. Yes, I fought marijuana throughout most of my life in education. I certainly was moved by Paul's story and so forth. But alcohol, one of the biggest distractions to driving and so forth. Paul, of course, gives us an example of marijuana can be and is a distraction to driving. But right here, and all of us, not all of us drink, not all of us use marijuana, but many of us, I don't know anybody around here that probably doesn't have a phone that you use sometimes, and it might be used illegally as well. This is one of the biggest distractions to driving in this country because there's far more phones than there are people that are using alcohol and marijuana.
Thank you.
The one other thing that makes this kind of even more controversial is, yes, the state has approved it and some other states have, but the federal government still considers this to be a crime. So that is food for thought.
Thank you. Please vote. And welcome, Mr. Kravitz. I forgot to recognize you earlier.
11 ayes, 3 nays.
So the resolution passes 11 ayes to 3 nays. Thank you, everyone. Scott will have zoning changes for our consideration. I think he's saying in December. He might be a little ambitious. I don't know. Nonetheless, we look forward to working with him. If you have any comments about specific zoning, since this is a special use matter, let him know. I would ask for miscellaneous comments from anyone if you have them. Seeing none, I would just say go be with your families. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.